It was March, just after Spotify had launched in India, and I found myself hunched over my laptop, typing away with a sense of urgency that only late-night work could bring. I didn't realize when the clock had struck 2 a.m. Time had slipped away unnoticed, the minutes folding into each other like they didn't exist. My roommates, already weary from their own days, had gone to bed around 1 a.m., leaving me awake alone in the room. The quiet felt different now, more pronounced, like the walls themselves were waiting for something. The wind, a constant companion in Punjab, was howling that night, fierce and unrelenting. It had always been a part of life, rattling the windows and doors in its wake, but tonight it was more violent, more insistent. The gusts slammed against the balcony door with such force that it rattled the frames, the sound like the groaning of something alive. The howling wind echoed through the empty streets, bouncing off buildings in the distance, but the room felt separate from it, sealed off, untouched. Yet still, the door would not stop banging. The wind's voice was constant, but there was something different about it tonight, as though it had a rhythm, a purpose. I had grown used to the wind by then, accustomed to the way it made the walls creak and the doors groan. I brushed it aside, focusing on my work so I can have my sleep. But as I sat in the eerie silence of the apartment, a strange discomfort settled over me. The type of cold that doesn't just chill you, but seeps deep into your bones, made its presence known. It wasn't the kind of chill that comes from a draft or the air conditioning. This cold was different and natural, like it was trying to freeze something deep inside me, to stop me from moving. And the silence, it was deafening, the kind of silence that fills a room so completely that it feels suffocating. There was no sound from the corridor, no distant murmur of neighbors through the thin walls, no subtle hum of the refrigerator, no buzz of the apartment's old pipes. Nothing but the wind, howling relentlessly outside until it wasn't. The door banged again, harder this time, and I reluctantly got up to close it. I returned to my desk, resumed my work, and eventually turned off the remaining lights at my roommate's sleepy murmurs request. The only light in the room came from my laptop screen, casting strange shadows against the walls. Despite securing everything, the banging didn't stop. It was faint, but persistent, the wind causing the latches to rattle. I tried to ignore it and focused harder on my work. 30 minutes passed. Then I heard it. The front door creaked open. The wind, I thought. I'd been through this enough times to know it was just the latch. I rose once again, closed the door, and went back to my seat. But the washroom door it kept banging, over and over. Then, something even stranger happened. I heard voices. Not in the adjacent room, but as if they were right outside, coming from the balcony. I froze. The balcony was high up, on the 9th floor. How could I hear voices so clearly? I was used to shouting to communicate with people on the ground, but this was different. These voices sounded close, very close. Confused, I thought it must be my imagination. Maybe it was the wind playing tricks. The voices, though, didn't stop. They were distinctly human voices, talking in a hushed, urgent manner. I could almost make out words. Fear crept up my spine, and my heart started to race. The wind howled even harder, but something else joined in, the sound of raindrops. Or so it seemed. I thought I'd check it out to calm my nerves. Maybe I was just overreacting. I flicked on the light, walked to the balcony, and peered out. There was no rain, no drops, no storm, just the same gusty wind, nothing more. I stood there for a moment, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled deep inside me. And then I remembered something, an incident from a few days ago. Someone's shirt had fallen from the balcony above, getting tangled in the ropes of our own. The guy had come down to our room and told us he had been screaming for help, but none of us heard him. How could we not hear him right outside, the same way I had heard voices just now? I started to panic. My mind raced with possibilities. Was I imagining things, hallucinating? Or was there something more sinister happening here? I decided it was time to go to bed. I needed to sleep and forget about the unsettling noises. But when I walked back to my room, something was different. The washroom door was now closed from the inside. My front door was open again. I felt my pulse quicken, My roommates were fast asleep, their breathing slow and even. But then came the unmistakable sound of voices again, this time from inside the washroom. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. My gaze was locked on the washroom door, closed, silent, yet somehow brimming with a terrible expectation. The voices, now unmistakable, weren't just faint whispers anymore. They were conversations, low and muffled, as if there were people huddled together inside. But my roommates were fast asleep still and unaware, and the apartment, despite the unsettling quiet, was empty. There was no one else here. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but the voices felt like they were crawling into my skull, reverberating in my ears. The words were indistinguishable at first, but their tone, sharp and tinged with something menacing, was clear. They seemed to be calling from the darkness, weaving around me, to close, to real. Panic surged through my chest, but I couldn't look away. Every muscle in my body screamed for me to run, but I was paralyzed. My legs trembled under me as if made of jelly, my feet unwilling to move an inch. The air in the hallway felt heavier, thicker, as if it was closing in around me. I took a hesitant step back, hoping to escape the suffocating grip of terror that had me in its clutches. But just as I shifted, the washroom door creaked. The sound was soft at first, barely audible, but then it grew louder, the hinges protesting as the door inched open. It moved slowly, just enough to let out a sliver of the darkness inside. I felt something cold rush over me, as though the room itself was exhaling. The voices intensified, becoming clearer, more distinct. My skin prickled, an icy chill creeping down my spine. The words, though muffled at first, grew sharper, angrier, more desperate. I could make out phrases, now horrible phrases, that sent a jolt of pure terror straight through me. They weren't words I should have heard. They weren't meant for this world. They were guttural, raspy, like something dragging itself from the depths of a forgotten nightmare. I could hear them, like the low hum of distant voices, so faint it was as if they were muffled by the walls themselves, but somehow still inside my head. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I could feel their presence, crawling inside me. Then the whispers became more distinct, low murmurs like fragments of sentences, each one too twisted to understand, but too close to ignore. The sounds came from behind the door, as if someone or something was speaking from the depths of the darkness within. They were soft, like a child's voice, but warped, unnatural. I wanted to scream, but my mouth was dry, the words strangled before they could form. The voices shifted again, lower, more insistent. A mumble here, a whisper there, with no clear meaning, only a feeling of being pulled, drawn into the oppressive silence. I backed away slowly, my legs weak, my mind racing with terror. I didn't know what was real anymore. Each step away from the door felt like I was inching closer to the edge of a cliff, yet I couldn't stop myself. The washroom door creaked again, this time even more slowly, but louder, as if it was a signal, a warning that something was coming. A cold breeze blew past me, emanating from the cracked opening, brushing against my skin like a hand, too soft, too real. The voices were louder now, almost too loud to bear. The door inched open more, just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness. My chest tightened, and my breath became shallow, like I was drowning in the suffocating air. The voices were there, all around me, too close. Mumbles, whispers that called my name, but not with any familiar warmth, no. These were words that scratched at my sanity, that gnawed at my sense of reality. I could almost make out a few words now, but they made no sense. They weren't words of this world. They were wrong in a way I couldn't explain. But I could feel them, wrapping themselves around my mind, tightening like a vice. The whispers continued, but now they were clear enough to unsettle me completely. Not just words, they were directions, twisted suggestions, like someone pulling me in, trying to convince me to approach the door. But no matter how faint or soft the voices were, their message was unmistakable. Something was inside, something waiting, something I shouldn't find. I tried to back away, but my body wouldn't obey. I felt like I was rooted to the spot, staring at the slowly opening door, the whispering voices growing louder, as if they were coming for me, demanding that I listen. I looked at my roommates to see if any of them were awake because of the noise, but they were still sleeping soundly. I wanted to wake them, to tell them what had happened, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was alone in this terror, trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't escape, and then the voice just stopped. No sound, no nothing. Just like a TV was unplugged, cutting the noise off abruptly. The voices might have stopped for now, but I could still hear them, echoing faintly in my mind. The wind began to howl again, but it was distant, like it was coming from a place I couldn't reach. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know what I heard or what it wanted. The next day, I could barely sleep. My mind kept replaying the events of the night before, the eerie voices, the washroom door creaking open, and that chilling moment when I heard the voices in it. As morning light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows on the floor, I tried to shake off the feeling of dread. My roommates were still asleep when I left my room, their deep breathing coming from their respective rooms, undisturbed by the events of the night. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. It was already past noon. I needed to talk to them, to find out if any of them had heard or experienced anything strange the previous night. I knocked on Arjun's door first. He was the most likely to be awake by now. He had a habit of waking up late, especially after late-night gaming sessions. The door creaked open slowly, and I saw him sitting up in bed, his messy hair and groggy eyes betraying the fact that he was still recovering from a night of little sleep. "Hey man, did you hear anything weird last night?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Arjun blinked a few times, as if processing the question. "Weird? Like what?" "I don't know, voices. Maybe it sounds crazy, but I heard voices last night, voices that weren't mine, not anyone's in the apartment." I paused, unsure if I should continue. But the need for answers pushed me on. And the wind, it was insane last night. The door kept banging, and I could have sworn I heard someone whispering. "Did you hear anything like that?" Arjun frowned. "You're messing with me, right?" "It was windy, sure, but I didn't hear anything." "You were probably just working too hard or something. Maybe a bit of a freakout from all that late night stuff." I nodded, feeling a little disheartened. Arjun was a skeptic, always had been. He would never entertain the possibility of anything supernatural. I wasn't sure if I believed in ghosts or anything, but last night had shaken me to the core. "All right," I said, forcing a smile. "Maybe I am just tired. Thanks, man." I moved on to Samir's room. He was always a bit of a night owl, spending most of his late hours on his phone or reading something random on the internet. I knocked a few times before he finally opened the door, his face still half buried in the covers. "What's up?" Samir asked, his voice muffled by the blanket. "Hey, did you hear anything strange last night? Anything like voices?" I asked again, but this time my voice wavered, as if I was second-guessing myself. Samir blinked at me, his expression unreadable. "Voices? What kind of voices?" I felt a lump form in my throat. Like whispers. Talking. They were clear as day, Samir. I heard them from the balcony, then inside the apartment. It was so real, but I thought it was just the wind. Except when I looked outside, there was no rain, no one there, just the same howling wind. "Did you hear anything, or was I losing it?" Samir stared at me for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as if he was trying to piece something together. Finally, he shook his head. "No, I didn't hear anything. But I've heard weird stuff in the past, especially at night with the wind and all. You might have just imagined it, man." I sighed, feeling the weight of his dismissal. Neither of my roommates had heard anything, and they both seemed to think I was just overworked or imagining things. It didn't make sense. I wasn't the type of person to make up stories, and yet the fear I'd felt last night was real. But maybe they were right. Maybe it was all in my head. But as the sun dipped lower and the shadows grew long, I couldn't shake the anxiety creeping up my spine. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind made me jump. I felt like I was being watched, like something in the apartment was biding its time, waiting for me to lower my guard.